This podcast was recorded on the ancestral lands on Treaty 1 territory, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and the Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation.
This is Humans on Rights, a podcast advocating for the education of human rights. Here's your host, Stuart Murray.
My guest today is Knowledge Keeper Allen Sutherland. Allen Sutherland is a facilitator, a storyteller, heritage cultural interpreter, and First Nations engagement officer. He's a spiritual advisor, also the Earth Lodge keeper at First Nations Treaty 2 territory, and that's just touching the surface of what he's done. Knowledge Keeper Allen Sutherland, welcome to Humans on Rights.
Glad to be here.
So, Allen, one of the first things that I would love to get a sense of is what is the difference between an elder, because we always hear about elders, and a knowledge keeper? What's the difference?
We live in modern times, and then especially with the onslaught of social media, you get instant comments on who's an elder. An elder traditionally is one who's been going through life, no matter what their background through life, and they accumulate all that experience. And traditional type elders, and I'll say tradition, because they lived a life, of a good person, and the community recognized that. Even if you had a difficult life, but you found a way to get through that, you become very wise because of that experience. So elders are lifted up in terms of they get a certain age and they're highly respected for that knowledge. And the community honors elders. Now, what happened over time is that, in this history that most Canadians are starting to know about, is that the government have done everything it can to assimilate Indigenous peoples. In the process, have taken away those traditions, those knowledge, those elders that has that knowledge to transfer from one generation to another was interrupted by Indian residential school. So the rejuvenation or the bringing back those traditional ways started off very slowly. In 1951, the Indian Act was revised that you can practice this. That one time you couldn't; it was against the law.
Really?
Yeah, and you couldn't gather, you couldn't even go and harvest medicine. It was a law. Now, in 1951, they revised it to allow freedoms because of the pressure of Canadians that fought with Indigenous veterans in the Great Wars. That essentially awakened Canadians as if they were good enough to fight for us, how come we have to send them back to reserves and to be locked up under that Indian Act system? So there was this pressure to get rid of the Indian Act. That's another story, but government did not want to get rid of it, which gets into the history that I talked to a lot of groups. So they revised it to accommodate Canada as one of the founding fathers of the United Nations and human rights, but in their backyard, they're violating human rights.
Right. Right.
Especially genocide, as it was drawn up with the Geneva Code on genocide, because the Indian residential school was existing all the way even up to 1996. When you forcefully take children away from one race and to be handed over to another race was one of the lines of genocide. So anyway, there was tremendous political pressure to get rid of the Indian Act, but they didn't. They revised it to give some freedoms. Now, getting back to the question of yours, it was slow in coming, because if you had many generations of taking children to be disrupted in their culture and their worldview, and then along the way, it was illegal to practice medicine. So after a while, most communities have lost this way of life. It slowly comes back when you have nations gather like powwows, a gathering of nations. It started slow in the 60s, as I remember. And then it started developing more in the 70s. But what was critical in the 70s was a lot of these traditional ceremonies went underground. It had to protect it. And doing so, they were very strict on who can get access to those teachings. And they were very strict on that. Those elders at the time got together, the traditional ones, the ceremonial ones, our elders in general got together in Winnipeg. And they were concerned that the young people have lost their language. There's no way to draw them into the lodge again, open up the lodge again, so they can be drawn in to learn these way of life. So they agreed not to be so strict. But they also reminded each other that everybody on earth is part of the Creator's garden. And it was never meant to be a secret society. It's just that colonization and religion, like the Jesuits, have forced the people to go underground to protect it. Now it's time to share.
Mm-hmm.
So it started slowly. Slowly, we got elders teaching these traditions and gave these teachings. And one of my mentors, and he's still my mentor, he's still around, is Jules LaValle. Now, he taught me a lot of things when I first came to Winnipeg. And I have had many other teachers since then. So he would be called an elder. And those that teach these things were called elders.
Okay.
But what happened, though, is that as young people start learning these teachings, they weren't taught properly of the protocols, the ethics. And essentially, if they don't have a teacher or a mentor, they're essentially going on their own. They're going on their own. And it was very prominent that there was a lot of these ones that are describing themselves as elders came out of the Rockwood, Stony Mountain, because they spent a few years getting involved with the teachings of those elders, went through the ceremonies like sweat lodge, and they might have even picked up a pipe, but they're not formally, they still had to do a lot of healing for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they weren't properly instructed. So the term came from, not too long ago, it was about 15 years ago, maybe about 20, that they were calling them popcorn elders.
Popcorn? Popcorn elders.
Because it just popped up.
Right.
So after a while, there are those that are legitimate and those that are introduced themselves as elders. It was getting confusing. So a few years back, people says, well, everybody's going to be an elder. That's a given. And when it comes to those healing councils, that's what we call those elders. They're part of a healing council, is that they're endorsed by other elders from the community. And they essentially say, you're an elder now. So you can't argue, even if you feel that you're so young. You can't argue.
Okay, it's such an honor.
It's an honor.
Yeah.
And that's how it usually works. Then there's going to be elders that are going to still struggle with life. They're addicted to something, or they end up occasionally hurting people or hurting themselves.
Yeah.
They're not good role models.
Mm-hmm.
So even I came up with a way of describing it is we're all going to be seniors.
Right.
And those are seniors with
right.
problems.
Right. Sure.
So just to help with the idea of what is an elder. So an elder goes through life, experiencing life, the hardships of life, but as a result have achieved wisdom.
Okay. And a knowledge keeper? And a knowledge
keeper is a term that's been used now, especially for those that are young. I have been called a knowledge keeper because I haven't achieved as an elder. I haven't been told I was an elder until recently in the last few years. It was the easiest term to say those that have traditional teachings or the gifts, or those that practice healing, those that walk the talk, they live the life, they are role models, and they are supported by the community. So they would say you're a knowledge keeper, the keeper of the gifts.
Right.
So this way you can develop yourself to grow to be that knowledge keeper.
Right.
So that's why these days it's more important to acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers than just say a blanket term of elder.
Right.
A traditional knowledge keeper is mentored.
Okay.
But you can also go through the path of picking up your culture again by going through all the ceremonies. And if you've gone to a Sundance, you commit yourself to that very sacred ceremony of 4 years. And I'll just quickly describe what that is that you give tobacco a commitment that you want to be a sun dancer for whatever reason. It's mostly for healing of oneself, healing your community, your family and community, and healing the world.
Okay.
So it's 4 days and 4 nights without any water or any food. And you dance from when the sun is coming up to the sun goes down. You're focusing on a tree of life. So you're committing yourself in prayer.
Okay. And Alan, let me ask you, is that something that is available to both men and women?
They both go together.
Both can do a Sundance together.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because, like I said before, in Creator's Garden, it was never meant to be a closed-off society, even with ceremonies.
Right.
So we have all peoples that have joined. Even other religions have joined in a Sundance. And it's not just for a bucket list to check off.
Right.
If you're committed to your spiritual development and to learn more about that, this is the highest form of the ceremony. So when you go to your 4 years, then you can pick up a pipe. You can do other ceremonies like a sweat lodge, and you might even find your gifts that you can have for like to help others.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of saying, okay, I'm getting on that path as a traditional knowledge keeper.
Right.
And we call it the Red Road.
We call it, sorry, what's that? You call it?
We call this way of life the Red Road, of living the life of the Anishinaabe, the life of your ancestors.
Yeah.
But it's the road that is long and narrow.
Mm-hmm.
And along the way is that there's temptations and there's life, distractions. There's also blessings. But to truly be on that long and narrow road of the Red Road is to know who you are and to know where you're going.
Right.
And it's neutral. It's neutral in a fact that that's what a healer is. They don't prejudge. They don't judge. They don't say, oh, you should have been doing this. None of that. It's basically when you go on this road, you're committed to not only to your development, your spiritual development, your healing development, but the purpose is to help others. Mm-hmm. So you have to be neutral.
Yeah.
So that's the Red Road.
Yeah, the Red Road. So, Alan, when you have now, you're a knowledge keeper, and as you said, somebody has indicated to you that you are an elder, but we're talking about you as a knowledge keeper for a moment. What are some of the challenges that you've had on your journey to become a knowledge keeper? Well,
Creator knew my purpose in this life. And he says, go ahead and experience life. Like we all experience life. We all had our good times, right? Or we develop a career, right? But then the Creator says, well, fine, that's good and dandy. But remember why you came here? There's a purpose for you, right?
Right.
So there was that tugging, that spiritual tugging and saying, this is what you have to do. Because where I came from in my community, we didn't have those traditions. We grew up very Christian. In my case, Roman Catholic faith. And I was very good in terms of biblical history or world history because of it. That was very helpful to understand how people think in this world and why do they think the way they do. What is spiritual beliefs? Anyway, that's part of the journey. I came from that kind of background, but as along the way, I met with elders. At the time, we call them elders, right? And they gave teachings what life is, like using tools like the medicine wheel, talking about how to grow personally, how to be grown physically, emotionally, all the 4 quadrants, spiritually, and such. So it was a journey, but eventually I got more and more into it. And because of that, I was able to pick up a pipe, but I wasn't going to use it yet because I was overwhelmed. I said, what do I do with this pipe?
Right, right.
But it was an honor to receive one.
Yeah.
So it was a beginning of what we call a sacred bundle. These gifts that you receive are just essentially, they're just tools. They're not idols to be worshipped. They have important meanings to it, and they're just tools. But over time, I was creating my own bundle. Now I was observing others, how they were using the pipe, how they were using their bundle, what are the songs that they're singing, what are the teachings. So I was just more of an observer than anything else. That's part of my gifts. Is I'm always observing, always learning, and I have this intuition on how this all fits in. So that was always been my gift. But it took an elder to draw me out, and I'll share this because this is one I honor Jules O'Valley about, and how he drew this up from me. Sitting in a circle and learning from an elder, their life experience or their teachings. So I'm sitting with Jules O'Valley, and I'm right next to him. And he was about to go and talk about the 7 beautiful values, the 7 sacred teachings. In my case, it's called the grandfather. Anyway, he was going to start going into it, and he looked at me. He looked aside at me. He says, Alan, do you know the 7 sacred teachings? And I looked at him. See, a lot of things was going on in my head. First of all, I didn't plan on talking to anybody.
Right.
I was comfortable just to listen.
Right.
And that's the way I like it. But immediately I knew what he was going to do. He's asking me if I knew the 7 sacred teachings. In my head, I was imploding. Like, oh my gosh, do I lie to an elder to get out of this?
Right.
And that's what was going on, because I knew. I knew the teachings. So I responded, yes, I do, hoping that was it.
Yes.
And he said, good. Now you teach them.
Got it. Yeah.
No, there's a second wave. I'm imploding inside. I'm stressed out. I says, well, you're not thinking so much. You're just thinking, I can't remember the teachings anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I remember, well, let's start with 1 and see where it goes.
Yeah.
The first one was the wolf teaching, the grandfather wolf. And that one teaches humility. So I talked about humility. I talked about the importance that nobody is greater than or less than, that we're here on our journey. And I still think back, why was it the wolf? Because later on, the same elder, Jules O'Valley, brought me from the world into the wolf pack, into the ceremonies, into this group, the Red Road Walkers. And I was a lone wolf. That was my survivor skill. And he brought a lone wolf from the wilderness to the wolf pack. So it only makes sense later on that the wolf is a good place to start.
For sure.
And I've been teaching ever since.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's still part of my life. He, along with his wife, Margaret LaValle, we work together because we work on Indian resident school survivors. So for me, it's a personal journey. Now I'm in a position where I'm sought after for people that want to hear all this. And I'm free to teach it because I believe in empowering a human being and empowering all of us, because our teaching is essentially it's a call of action today. There's prophecies that talk about this age of lighting the 8th fire, and it talks about all the experience that we'll have throughout the ages, which came true. Even Crazy Horse had said before he died, this warrior in the United States that fought against the U.S. armies. Before he died, he had a vision of all the people dancing under the tree of life. And he had seen that there were many races, all colors of the rainbow. And they were all praying, dancing for the same thing. And that is to save the planet.
Right.
No,
right.
I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not
No,
exactly
I appreciate that.
But it's that that's how I recognize the true knowledge keepers.
Mm-hmm.
When they're a little bit strict and says, you can't do it that way. Or he says, why are you teaching them these things? It's supposed to be secret. It's supposed to be ours. Well, they're on their journey.
Right.
They haven't achieved the overall what it means to be a human being.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And right now, there's a tremendous need to not create, but to have the term that's used today for healers is light workers. The Hopi prophecy essentially says there's 144,000 light workers that are here to save the planet. And one of my spiritual friends had told me I'm one of them.
Wow.
So how can I get the numbers up?
For sure. So
I start teaching it.
Yeah. So Alan, let me talk a bit about that, because one of the things on your website, whitespottedhorse.com, when you go to that website, there's a big headline there that says Understanding Canada's Indigenous Peoples. And that's what I would love to explore a little bit with you in this next segment is, where do you start with that conversation?
Well, we have to start by, when I teach it, I start from the beginning of origin story. All peoples of the world, including all, we commonly call this continent Turtle Island, before Europeans showed up, because it's related to our traditional teachings. But the origin story is that we all came from original human being. And then over time, they became many languages, many nations. And they fill out all the Creator's garden, which is the world. So it's always good to start from there, because there is a commonness to it, to the story. And it's about reaching out and finding common ground. Because if you went through a story, and no matter, sometimes people are very up here in the head, they're going to judge, or says, okay, let's see what this goes, or they're just saying, I don't know why I'm here. Whatever reason. You reach out to people's hearts, and that's where your spirit is dominantly is to bring them from their head to their heart. And the best way to do it is find common ground, but to break this, whatever this is in between, is to tell a story. So I tell a story about what we see around us. And I usually tell the story of that Indigenous people, because their worldview is this. When they see the sun, they see grandfather's sun. When they see the moon, they see grandmother moon. When they look to the sky, they say father sky. They look to the ground, and all the life around us, our mother Earth. All of life is our brothers and sisters. And we're all connected by the same spirit that we can call energy. That's creation. So people are saying, oh, this is interesting. I'd like to hear more. Because I'm tapping into your spirit that already knows this.
Yes. Yeah.
Is this the human experience, the human program? We start off by not knowing anything. There's this blanket that covers us before we come and walk in this life. Because you don't take all that experience of the cosmos with you when you start experiencing life. So there's a veil. I know one person teach me there's an angel that presses on top of your upper lip there, that little indent, and goes shh.
Shh. Yeah.
And you start from scratch.
Right.
So now you're born into a family, you're born into a community, you're born into this world, and you're influenced in this world. And the three things that makes you in this life that'll shape you, how you think, how you see the world, what is your worldview, is essentially your belief systems. Who is giving that to you? What are they giving to you? And unfortunately, if it's not always a good thing in terms of judging our neighbors, or how racism formed because of lack of knowledge or ignorance, is because they transfer that. They say, oh, those people are that way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a program for a little baby, for a little child as they grow. So it's also your belief system. That's the human program. It's also your ego in terms of your emotional response, being annoyed, anger, joy, sorrow, and grief, all that and how sometimes if you don't keep ego in check, it dominates your thinking. In other words, you got a big head, you think you're the best and the greatest in the world.
Right.
See how far that goes.
Yeah.
Because it won't create harmony with others.
Right.
In your mind, you might be the greatest. But in the long run, it's why doesn't anybody talk to me?
Right. Yeah.
But the last one, which as a healer, such as myself, deals with all the time, is fear. Now, especially fear is introduced when you're a child, when nobody's there to explain anything to you why. And a lot of traumatic events, a loss of innocence, and nobody's there to explain you about things. Like recently, I helped a fella had to deal with death because he didn't know why a body was being lowered into the ground when they seen that person like days ago. So they carry that fear, and then they get older. It manifests into an illness because it's unresolved. It's internalized, internal chaos. So it's part of the healing is to release that energy, but not to lose the lesson. This time you're not triggered anymore. You let it go. But remember, life is about learning the lessons of life. So that's part of growing. So fear is very common, how it motivates one's life. So if those are the three main thrusters on how you think in this world, it is no wonder that 75% of the population, or even higher, are always thinking negatively because they think bad about themselves. They think bad about themselves, or they don't like the way they look, or they don't like or they don't make enough money, or they're not educated. There's always an ongoing record that plays out every day, and there are people walking around with that. But the freedom is to say, I don't want to be burdened with that anymore. I want to think positive all the time. So even as a healing for myself, which is always going to be ongoing as a lifelong learner, but as a healer, I'm always healing myself. There's going to be days where you forgot those things. Going through COVID the first time, I forgot all my strength. Forgot all my teachings. I was just like anybody else. I fell into mild depression. Then I recognized later on, like I took a good break from my work last December. And I was just cleaning out some things, and I looked at my old notes and says, I forgot about all these teachings. So I started organizing them. I was motivated. Now, recently I do health walks where I says, you want to walk with me for about an hour? Because people through this current COVID period are not talking to each other, socializing with each other. I got my second vaccine a month ago. I'm good to go, but we walk outdoors.
Right.
And basically giving people a chance to reconnect with another human being again. It not only brings them healing, it brings me healing.
Right.
And we are social people. We are feeling people. That's what it is to be a human being, to experience life, to experience all those emotions. But the whole world has gone through a crisis. And that's why depression, anxiety, and mental health is it's all around us.
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question. What was the second question?
Well, I just wanted to talk about this notion about, the understanding Canada's Indigenous peoples and how you have that conversation and how you start. And we've gone through, the whole issue around the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the report that the commission did, headed up by former senator. He wasn't a senator at the time, Murray Sinclair. And, that document seemed to have landed in Canada. And to some extent, there's always the sense, I think, Alan, when these reports land somewhere, that they don't know what is the next step. Does it go, does it have a lifeline of a couple of weeks and then the next issue comes forward? And so where does this Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the healing that should come from that, where does it go? And so when I look at your spiritual journey, you talk about understanding Canada's Indigenous peoples, that to me is something that I think we need to spend time as a nation talking about and listening. And that's why I think I was so intrigued when I heard we shared an event together during Anti-Racism Week. And when I heard you speak, I thought it was so thoughtful and so graceful in its approach that it had a tendency to draw me in as opposed to push me away. So I think that's something that you have a great talent. I don't know if talent's the right word, but you have a spirit about you. And so I think that's the kind of conversation I love having with you.
Well, I appreciate those comments, Stuart. But that is my purpose when I look back at all these things. I grew up as a historian of oral traditions of my people. History that I got wasn't from books. It wasn't going through like a university, which I went for about 1 year. It came from my people being raised by my grandparents. And they were avid visitors. They visit everybody, many communities. And as a child growing up, I'm always with them. So I heard all the stories. So that it became part of me. I never knew that later on that I'm going to be able to teach all this. I also was I was like a Forrest Gump in a lot of ways. You know how he was throughout that movie, he was in key historical times.
Right.
I was kind of like that guy.
Yeah.
I was kind of like that guy because of I had people who were chiefs, who were elders, that seen something in me and they wanted to bring me along. They wanted to teach me. So I've always been mentored that way. Always been mentored by chiefs. And I was taken along to all when chiefs gathered and talk about their issues, about trying to fight back and get their rights back. And I was there.
Yeah.
I was there in major events. Like this is where Truth and Reconciliation really started. It was the time of Oka. But that summer, 96, I think it was 96, I'm not sure. I forgot. No, 1990. That summer was called Indian Summer because it wasn't just that. That was the end of that summer. What was happening is because of Meech Lake. It was Elijah Harper that said no. What is he saying no to? Well, ever since our Constitution was created, they said that we're going to we're going to bring in Indigenous people. The only thing they did there was Section 35 is to recognize the 3 Indigenous groups.
Right.
Indian, that's Inuit, and the Métis.
Right.
And it also did by introducing the mat into the doorway by saying we recognize Aboriginal and treaty rights as part of our laws. Now the goal was to go and say how would they fit into the federal system, because they were out. In fact, I think, and I still believe this, we as Indigenous people are still out. That's unfinished business. The door is still there. It's just that government is trying to figure out how do we go through the door. So that's another story. I could tell you about First Nations and 32 territories. It says, we're not waiting for you guys.
Yeah.
We're going to do it. But anyway, there was these secession meetings to work with the chief, and the government at the time, Dean Chrétien and all the premiers, they never took it seriously. They just ran out the clock. We owe you 3 meetings, or is it 4? I'm not sure. We're running out the clock. They weren't committed. So it becomes a constitutional crisis because it hasn't been achieved yet. At the same time, what was going on with Quebec was they were going to negotiate to bring Quebec into the Constitution as well, because they said we have inherent rights. So not only First Nations saying we have inherent rights, Quebec is saying we have inherent rights. But how does this fit into our new Constitution, 1982? There was the Meech Lake Accord to try to bring in Quebec, but they didn't want to do anything with the First Nations. So, say, oh, good, no, Quebec is going to agree to these terms, but they failed to bring in the First Nations. There was no plan to meet with them. So they had to get it ratified. And by the time it came to Manitoba, through legislation that it has to be a consensus, Elijah Harper says, no, I'm not supporting this. And they stalled it. It will not pass at all in this country. I was there. I was a young man, a police officer at the time. I was his bodyguard.
Right.
But I was involved with all the discussions with Phil Fontaine and Assembly Manitoba Cheese and Elijah Harper and the death threats that were going to everybody. That's why we brought it. I was a police officer and I was a bodyguard, but I seen it firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
But what created was a solidarity in this country. And it happened in 1969. It happened again before the Constitution. And it's happening again in terms of Indigenous people are blockading everything.
Right.
They blockade the roads, the railroads, the hydro lines, tampering, all that stuff. But they essentially shut down the country for about a day or two. Now imagine if the whole country was shut down and then nothing was moving in terms of transportation. I mean, it costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the one thing that government will pay attention to, is that if this affects my pocketbooks, you got my attention. It sparked activism, saying, if we cannot negotiate, then we're going to have to do something else to get the attention of Canadians, because this is Canadians' problem. It's not the government doing this. It's Canadians that don't know.
Right.
And Canadians need to know. So that summer, which happened later on with the Oakville crisis, over a golf course that they want to develop over those sacred burial sites. So the crisis took place. But from crisis comes opportunity, saying, what happened here? Canadians were starting to wake up to the consciousness of Indigenous people, where before they were out of sight, out of mind, and forgotten. Now they have no choice but to look at this. So there was a Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report that was released in 1996. The problem there with 440 recommendations was that's what it was, a recommendation. Mm-hmm. So it ended up being ignored and put on the shelves. Maybe a few things happened. But closer to home, you had the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry, because it was systemic racism with the police force and other agencies. So at least that brought into some self-governing initiatives, but it's still ignored as far as I'm concerned. But all this plays a part in educating the general public society, because if there's no peace in this country, there's no peace at all.
Right.
And it's just a matter of time that something will spark it.
Yeah.
Now, what's going on across in South Africa is where Truth and Reconciliation came from.
Mm-hmm.
They're dealing with the same system that was introduced to them by the British, called the Indian Act, apartheid,
mm-hmm.
because it went around the world, colonization. And now you got Nelson Mandela, who's been jailed for 27 years in a small cell. He was fighting back for his people's rights. And they used colonial laws to oppress people. So he got arrested. Now there was this pressure around the world against apartheid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Against this corporation that supports this. Him in the pocketbooks, as they will. I remember that as a Forrest Gump. So that's why I look at history as a personal, because I remember these things quite clearly. So now the pressure was, he was released. Does he come back as a bittered man? Does he come back and say, I want revenge? Does he come back and says, oh, now I'm going to really organize and create a revolt? Oh, he had time to think about what life is really about. So he came out talking about healing. In the process, the people, the whole world pressure was, you have to give him that right to election. So he was riding that wave. He's talking about healing. He's talking about reconciliation. And he became the first president in this process. So he said, we all need to heal as a society. We all need to work together. But we can't get there without knowing what took place first.
Mm-hmm.
So the knowing of that history and the knowing of what the role that everybody played government, police force, religion, laws, has to be taught and learned. But we need the stories of those that were a part of it. No, they weren't going to get in trouble. They're going to be pardoned. They're there to get the truth. Tell the truth why you did that. Was it that way because you were born as in a better way of life? Were you born in that class system and then you didn't care for the greater population? They really want to know the human element of how a person could enforce violent laws or become violent. So we can really understand the nature of a human being. But it was about learning. And the key thing about that learning, that reconciliation part is healing. No retribution.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same process that I do as I work with a person, a human being, is that I go and get release the negative energy in a safe way. But you keep the learning. And then it's about the empowerment of the here and now. And in that particular case, they says that we're all going to be a nation. Healing won't happen overnight. But that's going to be the priority. And they still struggle.
Yeah.
It didn't become perfect. But the thing is, they know that this will take a long time.
Yeah. Alan, let me ask you a question about 7 generations.
Yeah.
Because I know that there's comments that I've heard from others, some elders, who have indicated that the situation we find ourselves here with Indigenous peoples in Canada has taken us 7 generations to get here. And they talk about the healing process taking another 7 generations. Can you explain what does that look like? Just as you and I are talking, if I thought 7 generations, they always say that a good mother provides 7 generations of a great family. And so if you take it on the other side of 7 generations, I think that if that's the issue, some people would say, well, what can I do? I'm 1 generation. How is it going to happen another 6? Explain your view of what that 7 generations looks like.
For me, there is a different way of teaching it. But the most common is essentially every decision you make is for the 7 generations where you stand into the future. What you borrow is from the past, is your ancestors. You maintain everything for the ones and 7 generations from now. That's what's most commonly taught. One moment, I'm just going to talk about historically, what was the 7 generations for us today is a time of that treaty making. When we both entered into treaties, our ancestors taught long about this. They had ceremonies, they had shaking tents and so forth. Do we make this treaty? Do we enter this treaty with these newcomers? See, they could have said no. But because of the values that nobody owns the land, it's meant to share. But they do recognize things were happening around them, like the United States with the Indian Wars. More and more people coming to the east from Hudson Bay, but from the east or from the south in the United States. They knew things were changing. So they could take the path, and that's what everybody was afraid of, is the Indian Wars. Now, the United States, they just went through the civil rights, their civil war. So they had like 1 million soldiers. So they had to go west. They couldn't stay home and be a farmer because their economy was ruined. So go west, young man, go west. So to them it was manifest destiny. They're gonna fight it and just take it. In Canada, the previous 7 generations with Canada was the golden years of getting to know each other. That was the fur trade. That was making treaties. That was living together. But as the expansion was going westward, the critical year was 1871, 150 years ago. Was, do we share this lands with the newcomer? So they had to think about the 7 generations. As they probably knew, because we're visionaries. We have ceremonies that can go into the future and see how things are going to go. They said this is what's going to maintain our identity as the original peoples, as the original nation. So if you were to look back from now to 1871 and see the 150 years, it wasn't easy. It was terrible. but we survived. We're resilient because of it. Now we're at a point here of what are we going to do for the next 7 generations? We're not alone anymore. We're surrounded by all our relatives. We are, Canada is a diverse country with many, many peoples. But what are we going to do for the next 7 generations? That's how people think about 7 generations. What are we going to do for those children's to come? And that's commonly taught like that. But the Anishinaabe teaches your influence, the power of now. It's always about the power of now. The past is what you learn. You got to know the past in order to know where you're going. And the future needs to be created. So this is how I've been teaching it all along, was because I remember at least my great-grandmother. I remember her. I don't recall my great-grandfather, but my influence of them, my great-grandparents, is the influence of who I am today. Of course, I know my grandparents. I love my grandparents. In fact, one of the grandparents have raised me at a time in their generations that they weren't able to raise their own children. Now they get the chance to raise me. Then I'm influenced by my parents, which the majority of my life, I was never part of them. I went to my grandparents. So these are the building blocks of who I am. So it's also scientific. This is the code, the gene code you get, the DNA.
Right.
But the power is this moment. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4. Me. Now I'm responsible. They did everything they can for me, good and bad. But they made me who I am today. Now I'm responsible to say, they had it tough. I inherit their pain. I need healing. I need to address it. So I can be effective as a parent, as a grandparent. And we're going to work so hard to be in the lives of my great-grandchildren. Because we were told that we lived a very healthy life, and that was the norm. In spite of the illnesses that are plaguing our people today. But I made that commitment that I'm going to be giving them a good life. In our value systems, the overall what life is about is Minobezian, living the good life. I'm responsible for the generations to come, to ensure that they have a good life. I'm responsible to ensure that, I used to drink water directly from Lake Waterhen, from the boat. It was refreshing. But it was not long later, 96, they have this health warning. Can't do that. You got to boil water. So something changed. Now, I'm not going to fret over it, but I'm going to do what I can. I can't save the older world, but I definitely have the power of now and influence. So I'm going to do everything I can to give them the natural beauty my great-grandchildren could inherit. So there's a lot of work to be done. That's why the work that we do in committing to save this planet and to empower people, to wake them up and saying, we're in a crisis. So anyway, that's another story, but that's the 7 generational influence of a teaching that I teach.
Yeah. And so here's I want you to do a teaching for me. And I'm going to tell you that at the beginning of all my podcasts, I read, and I'm going to read what I pre-record, and I want you to reflect with me on the accuracy, or if there's something I'm missing or something I should change. So I start out like this. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I am in Treaty 1 territory. The land of where I'm sitting is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and homeland of the Métis Nation. Now, is that accurate? Is that appropriate?
Well, if you were to not have borders, like a treaty border, like a Treaty 1, and there's 5 treaties in Manitoba, which is Manitoba's a border, then that statement is fine.
Okay.
It's not accurate.
Okay.
As I said, traditional territory, the Inuit people who always gets excluded out of Manitoba, they're part of Manitoba.
Yeah.
is never mentioned.
Right.
And they're part of Churchill. They're part of Treaty Lake. They're up there. But traditional territory, you won't see the Inuit saying, this is my traditional territory. Same thing goes with the Dene, who's way up north.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own territory. But they won't say, this is my territory here in Treaty 1. Same thing with OG Creek.
Mm-hmm.
It's more northeast from here. So they won't call this their territory. But who would call this their territory? Their traditional way that they live off the land it's going to be the Cree, it's going to be the Dakota, it's going to be the Ojibwe, and it's going to be the Métis. So all these groups were living off the land in this territory before the entering of Treaty 1. So once a treaty was made, it's just like freeze frame. Everybody stop. This is who are the nations within Treaty 1 territory. Now, what happened over time? You got now Treaty 2, which very shortly was made, and they'll have more like a different people to acknowledge. Treaty 3, more in Ontario. They'll have whoever is in that territory. Then you got Treaty 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to 11. So that makes the heart or the bulk of Canada. So when people when they started acknowledging to do this, I actually think it was here in Winnipeg that started that process. And I actually think it was the University of Manitoba that started this process. Before Treaty Relations Commission in Manitoba, it's been around for 15 years. Reason why I say that, because they got it wrong.
Right.
So if you were the first and he says this is how it's done, then everybody copies that one, right? And then when the Treaty Relations Commission comes along, and which I'm part of, he says, well, that's not accurate. But it's been done. It's out there. It's been spreading around.
Right.
Throughout Canada, it's now wherever you are, it's being said. Who are the original people and what are their territories? So if you're far out east, it'll be the Algonquin people, right? Wherever you are. And there's treaties. That's part of your history. So land acknowledgement is to honor the original peoples that were here, because it was through their generosity of sharing that built this country.
Mm-hmm.
That created even the provinces which came later.
Yeah.
So the best way for reconciliation to say, as Canadians, this is our history, and we're forever grateful for the generosity of the original nations. And that's a great thing.
Yeah, that is a great thing. I can't tell you, Knowledge Keeper Allen Sutherland, what an honor it is to sit and listen and learn from you. The great part about what I'm doing here is that I know that we can do this again. And I look forward to it. I thank you for sharing your Red Road, your journey, and I thank you for the teachings, and I thank you for spending some time with me today on podcast. It was an honor, and I thank you.
Well, I thank you for inviting me. Very important that we all get to know each other. That's the way the Creator wanted diversity, but He didn't want anybody to judge each other, but to reach out to each other and appreciate each other, because we all have a lot to share with each other. So anyway, miigwech. And we usually do a saying after we do our ceremonies, is a reminder of what we are on this life journey, is that we're all relatives. Akana danan away magana. All my relations. Miigwech.
Humans on Rights is recorded and hosted by Stuart Murray. Social media marketing by the creative team at Full Current in Winnipeg. Thanks also to Trixie May Bituin. Music by Doug Edmond. For more, go to humanrightshub.ca.
A production of the Sound Off Media Company.